Welcome back to the 99, where we're focused on brewing a better competitive Commander. I'm your host, Patrick Marlett, and thank you for joining us on our first ever game show, casual or competitive. And I'm joined by...
This is Phil from Ramp Gang, ramp_gang on Instagram.
And this is Anton. I was here recently for a wonderful Brew Wars, but also part of Ramp Gang. If you want to catch more Ramp Gang shenanigans, you can go to Mental Misplay on Twitch. Lots of fun games there every Wednesday and Friday.
All right, gentlemen, your collective goal is to determine whether the cards I bring up are casual or competitive. My guests have no idea which cards we'll be discussing today, and will have to make their determinations on the spot. Now, how do we determine something so subjective? I hear you ask.
I did ask that, actually, yeah.
A poll was held on the 99 Discord determining whether or not the cards I'll be bringing up are considered casual or competitive. And if you can correctly match the responses to all 7 cards, you'll win a grand prize. Oh yes, and there's a grand prize. You'll get to see where the budget for our Patreon goes. But gang, before we jump into this video, I want you all to know that if you want to take part in our future polls for any segments on the show, but namely casual or competitive, I'll encourage you to jump on over to the Discord and become a member. There are weekly updates and announcements to live streams, video updates, and of course polls in the future. But beyond that, if you want to help support the channel directly, the best way to do so is Patreon. That's how we get all the fabulous grand prizes for this segment. And of course, purchase all the equipment you see that goes into this production. Also, if you want to help the channel indirectly, the best way to do so is via TCG Player. That's right, if you go through the link in the description and purchase your next packs, singles, or more, a portion of those proceeds go to help the production here. So it costs you nothing extra, but goes a long way to helping the channel. And as you all know, our Patreon members exclusively know that we do a monthly topic, and one of our Brew Crew members gets to reply to that monthly topic in our end roll. But the month's topic for January is, what color do you feel needs the most improvement and why? And I'll pass that question off to you all. What color do you feel needs the most improvement?
White?
White. Definitely white.
Yeah.
Why don't you tell us why? Because you play a mono white deck.
I mean, we discussed this a minute ago, but largely because it's so far behind the other colors in terms of what it can do in totality. I mean, card draw it needs, stack interaction, as you mentioned, it needs desperately. You know, there's like the lower CMC creatures or spells in white don't necessarily do enough comparative with other colors. I just think that the color could use a whole lot more area that it's permissed, you know, to interact with than it's been given. And
yeah, I think actually to piggyback on that a little, white is one of the few colors that doesn't really share as much of the color pie as other colors. Like sometimes, like green and white both destroy artifacts and enchantments, and maybe that's one of the pieces of overlap, but it doesn't really get card draw, it doesn't really get stack interaction, it doesn't really get even mana ramp besides Knight of the White Orchid or a couple random cards like that, Core Cartographer, and so it's kind of stuck in an awkward position right now where it doesn't feel as proactive as the other colors, at least especially in Commander. It's great in other constructed formats across the ages, of course, but it's not really the strategy for Commander these days.
Yeah, and white really relies on all of its best abilities being kind of conditional, you know? It's like you can get more lands from your library only if your opponents have more lands than you. So
so you're already at a disadvantage, and then it's benefiting you when you're like down in the rut.
Yeah. It's an equalizer, but doesn't really equalize.
But not even like greatly so. Like Tide, like you can find 2 planes instead of 1 if someone has more lands than you. It's like, it would be really great if it functioned to put it on the field. I mean, Lord knows green has 18 cards that do that. I mean, we're already trying to lean that direction with Gifts of the Estate. We've done a lot of land tutors in white, but they've all been deficient and generally overly costed. Tithe might be the one exception, but again, that's 2 hands, so
you know,
it doesn't affect the board.
No.
Also, I would touch on the fact that like one of the best cards to come out for mono white in the last several years is Smothering Tithe. And well, let's look at what's replaced Smothering Tithe functionally in a ton of decks now is Hull Breacher.
Yeah. And it's crazy that they gave the color that actively has wheels another card to abuse those wheels, when white doesn't even have a wheel. Like, if you gave Hull Breacher to white, that list isn't going to manipulate it to benefit off its own 99. It has to wait for the opportunity.
Yeah.
Instead, blue, it's like, okay, let's do Windfall, let's do Time Twister, and I'll make some treasure.
Yeah. And don't get me on Lapse of Certainty or Mana Tithe or any of these other white counter spells, because they're trash cards. They don't do anything. You know,
absolutely.
Helpful. There is a little bit of stack interaction in white, and none of it's playable.
Yep.
This week's topic for casual or competitive is artifact ramp, starting with Commander's most popular piece of ramp, seen in every list from Precon to Donkey Kong, and most recently Commander Legends. I am, of course, talking about Soul Ring. Soul Ring for 1 generic artifact, tap, add to generic. Now, is this card, gentlemen, casual or competitive?
Wow. You're really starting us off hot here, Patrick. Hotly debated, I am sure, and something that people have talked about forever. I'm going to start by saying that if Soul Ring was a more expensive card, our conversation would be very different. The fact that it is an inexpensive card makes people, I think, feel differently about it because it goes in basically every commander deck. But I'm going to say that a mana positive rock for 1 mana, if you're the only one at the table who has it, you're running far enough away from the game, and other people get kind of upset at that if they're not running it or if they haven't drawn it. It leaves you open to playing a Signet or something else on turn 2. It accelerates your mana far and beyond what most other Magic cards do, and I think this is like very deeply in the competitive camp. I realize that casual decks, basically all casual decks play it, right? But that doesn't mean that it is not a competitive card. It's just so good and so available that it goes into casual decks as well. So I'm going to say firmly, easily competitive. I know people talk about Soul Ring not wanting to be in their pods, and they want decks without it because it actually makes the game more fair. And I completely understand a one-sided Soul Ring is pretty unfortunate. So there are people out there in their pods who don't play Soul Ring and ask people not to play Soul Ring.
So you believe that this card is competitive, and for the same reason people will complain about seeing counterspells at their pod. It's unfair, unfun, the kind of advantage it offers the table.
Unless everyone gets one on turn 1.
So you're saying it's competitive. Now, I'll let you all know that our team has to agree on one or the other, so I'm curious to hear your side of this debate. Anton, casual or competitive?
So I'm actually firmly with Phil on this one. I believe that Soul Ring is a competitive card. It costs 1 mana, gives you 2 generic. If you land it early, accelerates very well. You know, it's a great card. There's a reason that it does go in every deck. I think that there's a lot of argument against it because people feel that it provides too much of an advantage. And those arguments you'll typically see at a casual table. The problem is Soul Ring is so ubiquitous. It's so available. Everybody can play it in every deck. And there's really no reason that you shouldn't unless you're specifically playing a deck that avoids artifacts for some reason. So, competitive.
I'll throw it out to the audience. If Soul Ring was a $500 card, would you put it in every deck? Probably not.
Probably not.
Mana Crypt is several $100s, and people love that card. And that is a hugely competitive card, in my opinion. I hope it's something we did get to talk about today. If it isn't, that's fine. I have no idea what the next cards are, but I'm going to go with Anton here, and we're going to say firmly competitive.
All right, gentlemen. So, our poll had a couple hundred Discordians vote on the 7 cards we brought here today. And remember, again, to get the grand prize, you need to get all 7 of these correct. So, with Soul Ring,
I think we biffed it.
With 117 votes to 35, a majority of our fan base believes Soul Ring is casual.
Wow. Very interesting.
How does that make you feel?
I think that...
Misheard. Misunderstood.
Perhaps only because it's so affordable and accessible.
Well, I'm glad we're doing this discussion for this reason. Because thinking about the accessibility of a card, yes, it goes in every deck. So yes, it goes in every casual deck, right? Mm-hmm. But that doesn't necessarily mean the card, in my humble opinion, is a casual card. It's a card for competitive, like shooting out a bunch of mana, right? And I think Mana Crypt is another example of a card that I would consider deeply competitive that people don't necessarily have access to. So think about the price point of a card when you're evaluating it too. In my opinion, if Soul Ring was several $100s, we would say it was a competitive card. And so
I'm likely to only be seen in more
competitive decks. Yeah. And so my thought about the way I'm thinking about evaluating these cards is as a card, like as a Magic card, not as a card that I can put in a lot of decks or I see in a lot of decks, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that this brings up a nice point about the objective analysis of what is competitive versus what is casual. And there are several factors that I think you'll find in almost anybody's evaluation of whether a card is going to go into a cEDH deck. That's mana efficiency.
Yep.
How much does it cost? If it's above 3 CMC, you're probably not going to see it as often in competitive decks. Is it a mana rock? Okay, does that mana rock cost less than 3? Does it produce more than it costs?
Or is it mana positive, which Soul Ring is?
Exactly.
And there aren't very many mana positive rocks out there.
That is a hugely important thing. The mana positivity of rocks makes a massive difference in the impact of that card when it comes down. So I I couldn't ever call this card casual, even though it is so readily available to everybody and so cheap.
Even against the majority. Even against the majority.
Even though we lost the game show, I still think we're right.
You know what? I'm going to give you a chance to still win that prize if you get the rest of these correct. That is all 6 of these correct, and we already mentioned it. But Phil wanted to talk about Mana Crypt, and guess what?
Yes.
The next card happens to be. With a surge of recent reprints, this card is seeing more play than ever. It is the part 2 to The Godfathers Part 1. I'm, of course, speaking of Mana Crypt. And we all know what Mana Crypt does, but I'll read it off for you now. It's 0 to cast artifact. At the beginning of your upkeep, flip a coin. If you lose the flip, Mana Crypt deals 3 damage to you. That seems pretty casual to play.
Yeah.
Tap it, add to generic.
You know, I mean, obviously we could just basically take the same argument we had for Sol Ring, cut and paste it, put it in here, except now the price point becomes relevant. That there's that issue of access that a lot of people don't necessarily feel that they have, so this is slotted into more competitive decks.
They're running on average now somewhere between $60 and $80 though.
Which is hugely different than...
They brought the price
Double
down.
Masters,
Yeah,
mystery
brought the price
boosters, people are cracking more packs.
Yep.
It's interesting. So,
Well, it seems like what they want to do, what Wizards wants to do, is make Mana Crypt a more accessible card because it is so damn good. It's just so good. It's a free Sol Ring. It's a free 2 mana every turn, and the life loss is negligible. So
yeah, exactly. That's a huge point in...
Well, mostly negligible, right?
I mean,
there's ad nauseam decks and other decks, but
when you're talking
still
about
run.
competitive Commander
still
or
run.
even just Commander in general, like we have 40 life. 40 life. Life is a resource. You spend your life on things. And spending life to like have early access to a couple more mana can be a massive difference between winning a game and just not. So
I've had a lot of turns with Mana Crypt and Godo that have won me the game because of it, and because
Absolutely.
even where a Sol Ring wouldn't have won me the game, but Mana Crypt, because it's 1 mana less, it's a mana positive rock +2, right? For Monolith is only a mana positive rock +1.
same with Sol Ring.
Same with Sol Ring. It's one of the few that's +2, and so. The other thing, interestingly, the life loss, this is something that I learned when I started playing Commander, is that is actually something that makes casual players like go, ugh, I don't want to play that card because it hurts me. And that's something we kind of get over as Magic players. And like you were saying, great point, life is a resource, right? And so because life is a resource, you use it to get your Mana Crypt out or use it to keep your Mana Crypt in play. And spending that resource as another means to advance your game state is really helpful. So I'm gonna just say like definitely competitive, and
100%.
it's $60 to $80 is like still a pretty expensive card.
Yeah.
And if you put it in every deck like you would put it in Sol Ring, suddenly how many copies do you need if you're not proxying or doing other silly things?
Absolutely.
all right, so it sounds like I know where we're going here. Phil, you say competitive. Anton, where are you at with this?
I'm going to say competitive as well. So I think if we're landing on it, we can definitely call it competitive.
Interesting. All right. Now, our fan base over on Discord voted 17 to 126, stating that this card is definitely competitive.
Hey, we got
Now,
one.
but not only did we get one, but I think that this underlies the point we made about Sol Ring. If Sol Ring were $80, it would be competitive.
Yep.
So when you think about a Magic card, don't just think about its availability. Yes, it goes in all the decks.
Think about what it does.
Think about what it does.
Yep.
Okay. So a little bit of schooling for you when you go and take the poll next week. Now you know how to grade these, and I do agree with that sentiment to a certain extent. I think accessibility was a major factor for people to weigh in, and I want you all to know we have a good diversity of casual and competitive players, and a lot of folks that are on the Patreon that play both. So
Absolutely.
I totally understand the availability issue. I think for a majority of us, at least at this table, we proxy, and we've encouraged it here on the channel. Obviously, don't swindle people with fakes, but if you proxy a card, that's totally fine. This is a casual format,
And
right?
a very expensive game.
Yeah.
It's an expensive game to play. So that's actually in competitive games, a lot of them, will proxy really expensive cards just so that they can play them and play Magic at
the
its most
saying-
ridiculous power levels.
Yeah, because the saying in competitive a lot of times I'd rather play the person and not their wallet. So if you're thinking of like breaking into competitive Commander and you can't afford things like a Mana Crypt, it's okay to proxy. It's okay to do that.
And if you're not opposed to proxying that, you may want to proxy this next one because it has been rising in price. The next card we'll be speaking
That's
of
exciting.
is a gorgeous one to look at. From Brimstone Mage to Forever Young, Vulcan Baga is notorious for those salacious depiction of hands. And this just might be his naughty masterpiece. Chrome Mox. For 0 mana artifact imprint, when Chrome Mox enters the battlefield, you may exile a non-artifact, non-land card from your hand. If you do so, you may tap this and add 1 mana of any of that exiled card's color. Now, gents, is this casual or competitive? And I have to say, we just saw a reprint of this in, if I'm not mistaken, Double Masters.
Double
Yes,
Masters,
that's right.
yep.
I'm going to go ahead and explain my reasoning before I tell you what I think. Chromox is totally card disadvantage, right? You're spending 2 cards for a mana. That's not great. But what are you gaining? You're gaining speed. And in certain decks, the extra card is irrelevant if you're playing a lot of wheels or if you're drawing a lot of cards anyway, or if you've resolved an ad nauseum. Because generally when you resolve an ad nauseum, you have an entire grip of cards. You can Chromox out something that you don't need, right? That's why all of these other Moxes are also useful in that way. So you're spending a lot of resources to put a mana into play. And I think that the decks that want to do that the most are competitive decks. Mm-hmm. So I feel that this card is also very firmly in the competitive camp because you have to spend so much to use it. And it is incredibly powerful in the right builds when you're either refilling your hand really well or you're just like going off with something like an ad nauseum, because technically a 0 mana rock is also mana positive. You could kind of see a theme with my current thinking on what mana sources, what makes a mana source a competitive mana source or not.
Yeah.
What do you think?
I'm gonna again agree with Phil on this. I think we're aligned with a lot of our thinking about this. It brings up a couple things for me. First off, I generally think if you're talking about a 0 CMC mana rock that goes mana positive, I mean it's gonna be competitive for the most part. You have things like Mox Amber, which are now kind of rising in price, that are a little bit more conditional and maybe not seen as quite as competitive. But
Mox Tantalite.
Mox Tantalite.
Maybe not Mox Tantalite.
No.
Does that even have a casting cost? I don't think it does.
Unless you're playing
That's how
Idris.
good it is.
Yeah. So a thing that Phil talked about a moment ago, and that we've talked about a couple times so far, is this idea of like how we utilize our resources, right? A casual player might look at a Chromox and go, I really don't want to exile any of these great, fun cards that cost 7 CMC in my hand in order to play this card. But everything that we have in the game is a resource that can be utilized, right? You can discard cards. You go down a card, but maybe you then end up with a wheel, like Phil said. Or you have an acceleration. You get your commander out earlier. Maybe your commander has a huge impact on the board. Maybe you spend life as a resource. Maybe you sacrifice your lands in order to get mana, like a Rain of Filth or something. These are all ways that you can elevate the game to a different level that are often things that are not found in a casual table. And they're not going to be found because I think a sentiment at a casual table is you want to hold on to everything that you have, right? You don't want to give away your resources. You don't want to lose your card advantage. You don't want to give up anything that you can, because all of it is precious. And any bit of removal means like you're suddenly falling further behind because you don't have as much resources to catch up with. So I would say this is firmly competitive, but it also brings up this sort of philosophical understanding of what is different between casual and competitive. And I think the expenditure of really everything you have as a resource is a marked difference.
So not to say that you wouldn't find a Chromox at the table, you firmly believe that the speed this provides your deck is leaning, or at least slanted more towards competitive styled lists.
Speed for the cost specifically,
Yep, absolutely.
right? Because you're giving up a whole card for it. So I think Mox Diamond is very similar. I wonder if we're going to talk about that as well, because you're giving up a land, which is actually even more of a resource because you tend to have fewer in your decks just in general by ratio.
Casual decks have like 40 of those.
Well, exactly, but then maybe Mox Diamond is a little bit more on that side of things. But I mean, think about a turn 1 play that's turn 1 land, Soul Ring, Chromox, Wheel of Fortune, and now I've spent 4 cards in order to refill my grip, and I'm going to untap, play and land, and now I'll have 4 mana in play on turn 2. Seems pretty spicy. Maybe even 5 if you're dropping other rocks.
So we feel competitive.
Deeply and definitely competitive.
Chromox, the votes were tallied up, and 130 individuals to a mere 9 believe that Chromox is a competitive card.
Okay,
Damn.
good. The way he's telling the numbers, I'm like, oh no, that first number is always the casual. The second one's
very
competitive.
polarizing.
Good flip. Keeping us on our toes.
All
Very
right,
good.
and keeping us on our toes, almost like keeping us on our hands, because our boy Vulcan Baga is at it again.
Oh, we're going to see more of these.
I bet we will.
No one apart from God can produce hands so masterfully, and the world of MTG should simply rejoice every time they meet their maker. Mox Opal for 0 mana. Legendary artifact, metalcraft. Add 1 mana of any color. Activate this ability only if you control 3 or more artifacts. Is Mox Opal also recently reprinted in that same set 2XM? Is Mox Opal competitive or casual?
I'm going to go ahead and cut and paste kind of the last few arguments that we've had here, but I will say competitive. There's a little bit of an asterisk on this one. Because it is conditional, I would say it is one of the weaker of the Moxes. If you have a certain artifact density in your deck, you're going to slot this in if you have it, if you can afford it. I'm not sure how much it's going for these days, but I definitely think Mox Opal is a competitive card. Again, 0 CMC mana rock that if you have 3 artifacts suddenly goes mana positive. It's pretty outstanding. And there are some competitive decks that will just use it even if there's not 3 artifacts on board to recurse something from the graveyard. So I'm going to go ahead and say it's a competitive card.
Situationally competitive.
Oh, very interesting.
Situationally competitive. That's interesting.
Well,
and just on your note about price, I'll just let you all know, the averages for Chrome Mox, our previous card, and Mox Opal, they're right around $30, depending on the condition. So they're about the same price. Chrome Mox, slightly more expensive on average. But with that thought in mind, Phil.
So definitely a much more accessible card, both Chrome Mox and Mox Opal. No disadvantage to using it, at least getting into play, but a disadvantage that your deck has to support having metalcraft. But most competitive decks are running lots of signets or talismans or other mana rocks, soul rings, mana crypts. I've seen explosive and had explosive turns with decks like Godo, which is a great example of a deck that uses lots of almost overloaded on artifacts, where Mox Opal is just a Mox Ruby. And I think that most competitive decks that you're going to see are going to be running this sort of fast mana suite of cards. It's going to be running these mana positive things that we've been talking about. And Mox Opal just slides right in and says, I fit nicely with this theme already. So you don't really need to build the deck so much around that, simply because you're already running these cards and they're already in your deck. And Mox Opal just goes, hi, I show up to the party and I'm also super valuable. And the times where I've seen a player in a competitive pod have a Mox Opal and not have it online is pretty rare. And I think for $30, if you're going to be buying a card like this, what other kind of a deck are you going to put it in, unless it's like some, mono brown Bosch deck, which would be freaking awesome, by the way. But I think something like that is almost certainly competitive, just because it fits in with the suite of fast mana that competitive is really asking for at once.
Absolutely.
All right, so on that note, gents, how do you feel about this card?
Definitely going to say competitive.
Subscribed.
All right, 25 versus 113. 113 individuals believe that this card is competitive. All right, we're moving along. You're 4 of 5.
Like I said, the first one didn't count.
Yeah, but everyone's wrong on that. I'm kidding.
But if you can land the rest of these again, you do walk away with a grand prize. And this next one is a real beaut of a card. What if I told you two that for 0 mana, you could cast that 2 CMC commander on turn 1? You'd call me a liar, wouldn't you? Well, maybe you've heard of a little card called Lotus Petal. For 0 CMC artifact, tap, sacrifice Lotus Petal, add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool, play its ability as a mana source. That is the old wording, but you get the idea. It's not an interrupt, it's not an instance, it's a mana source.
Mana source. I remember those days. I was 14.
Yeah, we haven't seen a decent reprint of this card at all. There's been the Mystery Booster and obviously Kaladesh Invention, so availability
Wasn't there like a
scant.
From the Vault one?
There is a From the Vault one.
There is a From the Vault one, but
They're all
that's
expensive.
in the 50 range. Obviously, our Tempest version, which is the one I read off and should have been on screen for you, averages around $8 to $10 pending condition. So they're still relatively affordable, easier to slot into most lists, slightly easier than Sol Ring. Is this card casual or competitive?
Well, I would have to go with competitive because I think it, again, falls into the suite of mana rocks that we talked about. So let's just take an example. Let's think about something like an Ad Nauseam or a Peer into the Abyss, right? I'm thinking of these mana positive rocks in the light of that because it's such a huge part of the current cEDH meta. You fill your hand with a whole ton of cards. Let's say you get 20 cards out of it, or in the case of Peer into the Abyss, maybe you get 40 cards. If you have anything in there that you can slap down for 0 mana and go mana positive, that is going to accelerate you into a win. 9 times out of 10, it's going to make you win on the spot. So Lotus Petal falling into that suite of 0 CMC rocks or just artifact suite for competitive commander, since it's an auto include in most of those decks, I'm going to go with competitive. It's also just, it's a great way to have early access to 1 more mana, which can be hugely different.
Yeah, I definitely agree about the fact that it is competitive. I was actually thinking about Chrome Mox again. Mm-hmm. So let's think about when you play a Chrome Mox. So you play a Chrome Mox and you burn a card, so you lost a card, and then the Chrome Mox is in play. So it's a -1 card, and now you have that mana forever, right? Lotus Petal is -1 card as well, and you get that mana 1 time. It's actually worse than Chrome Mox in certain cases. It's better in certain cases too. But we were talking about like the resources required to play your cards. And so this is basically just 1 mana. It's just a mana in your hand. Pyretic Ritual is also 1 mana because it costs 2 and gets you 3. So they actually are kind of similar cards in terms of what they do for you. Obviously triple red and like all those other considerations, there's no restrictions to playing your Lotus Petal. So definitely there's a lot you have to give up in order to do this. And if you're using the Petal, you better be doing something big and splashy and awesome. And I just think that if you're in a casual environment, you need to play a lot more mana, and like that extra mana is not going to do as much for you than it will in a competitive environment where it could get your soul ring down so that you could do other things, or it could partner with a mana crypt to play a wheel or play an opposition agent or other things like that. It also turns on Mox Chrome Mox, not Chrome Mox, the
Mox Opal.
Mox Opal.
Yep.
That's right. It also turns on your metalcraft for free.
Yep.
So for all of these reasons, I think that competitive decks are completely willing to just burn all the resources away to achieve the board state that wins the game. And I think that like Chrome Mox, you're net down a card. Unlike Chrome Mox, you get that mana 1 time. Less stipulations on getting that mana, but for that reason, I think it's pretty firmly competitive.
Yep.
But before you resolve that answer,
Yeah.
instance
Answer on the stat.
I have an interjection.
Please.
Okay.
It is the permanence of the card you feel makes it lean more towards or less towards competitive, correct? So Lotus Petal, because its lack of permanence, makes it worse than Chrome Mox.
I think they're very situational. I think you're spending the same amount of resources on your mana. In Chrome Mox, you're getting that mana forever, right, as long as it's in play. Lotus Petal, you only get it at that moment, but you get to keep a card in your hand. Still losing a card for that mana really depends on what you're going to do with that mana. And what you're going to do with that mana, I think, in competitive environments is something totally busted. And in casual environments, you're going to play like a huge, Elder Gargaroth or something like that and beat down with it.
Okay.
Yeah.
And between the two, you would say that Chrome Mox would be more competitive, correct?
I think they're both competitive for the same reasons, I guess.
Yeah,
but I guess maybe Chrome Mox is more
Chrome Mox
competitive.
is more competitive.
It's easier to play a Lotus Petal.
Yeah.
Lotus Petal slots into way more decks than
Yeah.
Lotus Petal, like Soul Ring, is less expensive, and it gives me color mana at any time, so I can see myself slotting in that in almost any deck I play, technically.
Yep.
I just don't think it does as much in a casual deck.
I just really want you guys to get the grand prize.
With regards to Lotus Petal, I will say that I have never, ever seen Lotus Petal come out at a casual table. The only times I've ever seen anybody play Lotus Petal, they were playing competitive Commander. So I would be surprised if the majority of the Discord voted for this to be casual, and I would be very interested in seeing what their casual pods
The casual
look
list
like.
look like, right?
Wow,
this
it's pretty
is actually
spicy.
pretty cEDH, guys.
Yeah.
So we're going with competitive.
We're gonna
Yeah,
go
and
with-
I think that like Soul Ring, you can probably slot it into a deck. I think the thing that we're saying is that the impact of this card in a cEDH deck is significantly higher than it would be in a casual deck, and it kind of belongs in those lists.
Absolutely.
Interestingly enough, 32.
Oh, should we show our answer?
You can. 32 to 109 feel that this is a casual card. To say
So interesting.
to say that 109 feel that this is competitive.
Oh,
Hey!
all right. Big fake out. Big fake out.
Big fake out.
You are correct, gents. That is 5 for 6.
I was about to be asking the Discord to start
5
DMing me
versus-
some of these casual deck lists. That'd be fascinating.
Pub stomp lists.
yeah.
So
It's casual. It's casual. It's fine.
moving on, we have another interesting card for you, and this is newly minted from Commander Legends.
Ooh.
Now, what if I told you that for 0 mana you could cast that 4 CMC commander on turn 1? Now, Black Lotus is banned though, right? Semi-right, but mostly wrong, because we have Jeweled Lotus. For 0 mana artifact, tap, sacrifice Jeweled Lotus, add 3 mana of any one color, spend this mana only to cast your commander. Now this is something that I think majority players want in their deck, and that's all I'll say on it. Is it casual or competitive?
This is tough, and the uproar about this card when it came out or when it was spoiled was significant, right? There are some competitive decks where this card is an absolute bomb, diggity bomb. Godo being like one of the top ones.
Teshar being another.
Exactly. There are a few. However, if you're playing multiple colors or partner commanders, it's not as good. It's good, but it's not as good. However, on the casual side of things, any casual deck that is able to slot this card in will, because casual commanders tend to be a little bit more expensive. Casual commanders tend to come out later anyway, and this can help with the tax if your casual commander came onto the board and got taken off the board. In a few cases in the competitive world, your commander hits the table and like you automatically win, and Godo and Teshar are kind of similar in that sense. But I personally feel like this is a more casual than competitive card. However, I think it's pretty close. And I think that that's because ultimately it slots into lots and lots of decks. It is a powerhouse in certain competitive decks. But it's also like amazing in almost every casual deck out there. And I play it in basically every casual deck because I want to slam my Aurelia the War Leader on turn 3 instead of on turn 6.
Yep. I tend to agree with you here. I think that, more often than not, casual commanders are going to lean into slightly higher CMCs.
Absolutely.
They're usually going to be 1 to 2 colors. You're not typically going to find 3 or 4 color decks in casual settings.
Yep.
Atraxa is hugely popular, both in casual and used to be more competitive tables, now mostly casual tables. And that you're not going to slot a Jeweled Lotus into that one, but a lot of other casual commanders, you're going to really want to have them come out earlier. I saw this card and I was like, I have a Zakama deck that I would love to play a little bit faster. I have a Wanderer deck I'd love to play a little bit faster. So I think it does have more of a home in a majority of casual decks. I think there are a significant amount of competitive lists that play it nowadays. I do think that the community's reaction to it was, oh, this card is broken. Oh, it's got to get banned. They reacted as if it was like the most competitive card ever. And I don't feel it is as ubiquitous as a Soul Ring or many other cards. I do think that a lot of people are going to feel that it's a competitive card because, again, it's a 0 CMC mana rock. And more so than that, the price point. The price point is incredibly prohibitive to a lot of people. It is very
expensive.
It's super expensive, especially if you're going to get a extended art foil Pringle version of it. This accessibility issue is a difficult one to overcome when you're analyzing competitive versus casual, because the emotional response that people have to when something is out of their price range is that, well, that's just for spikes. That's for people who are playing competitively. That's not for me, and they're going to feel prohibited from even like having any access to the card, and kind of write it off as competitive for that. So I think the community response is competitive. I think this card fits in a lot of competitive decks, but I will actually agree with you here that I think that if you really look at the card, what it does, where it'll find a majority of homes, I think that it has more of a home in casual. Not to say it's not competitive, super powerhouse card.
It's a great card.
But I do think it has more of a home in casual.
Okay, so when this card was first announced, it was selling on pre-order for multiple hundreds of dollars, particularly for the foil Pringle edition. And it is a mythic in the set, so the rarity and the scarcity of the card is real. However, in all state, I purchased the card for $80. They're about on average now $60. More packs are being opened. This set was a huge hit for Wizards. There's a lot more of them out in the market. However, the accessibility is a factor, and $60 is still out of reach for some people. Now, with that in mind, do you still hold true that this is casual over competitive?
I do, and I want to sort of underscore the fact that the set was such a big hit and so many people opened it means everyone wanted one, and not everyone plays competitive Magic in EDH.
Yep.
And so I think that this being the chase card of the set, which it kind of is, right? It's on all the art, and it's a frickin' Black Lotus. I mean, come on. That, I think, actually leans me even more to saying that, in my personal opinion, I think it's a casual card more than it is a competitive card, but I also feel like there's shades of brown here.
Yep. Yep, it fits.
Total artifact joke for you.
Fits into both categories.
Not anymore.
No
more shades.
It's shades of silver now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that. I'm not saying gray.
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree. I think there's going to be plenty of people out there who want to have our heads on a stick for saying it's casual, but we're going to go with casual.
All right, gentlemen. 38 to 99 feel that this card is in fact casual. They would agree with you. However, the majority state that it is competitive.
Wait,
just have the numbers!
You totally sidelined us.
He brings us up and he takes us down.
I'm so sorry. You will not be receiving 2 foil commander spheres. You can tell by the shape of the card, but that would have been the prize for this game. However, if you'd like, we can continue with one final stapled card.
Let's continue. I'm going to just start answering questions about other cards now.
We'll redeem ourselves here.
Although I will state that this was a toss-up from the get-go when the polls launched. It was a dead tie for casual or competitive. And I do believe that that initial majority were in favor with you. It is a card that wants to be seen, not to throw my own hat in the ring, in a lot of lists. And I have to say, cEDH is rampant with partners, and a lot of these partner pairings don't really benefit off the Jeweled Lotus. And that's something you brought off right off the bat.
That's
so
right.
It is interesting to see that I think a majority of players feel, because of the mana positivity of this card, the 3 CMC, it's a shoe-in. However, I will state that not every list depends on their commander as a win con, and more oftentimes than not, Rograk Silas, you don't even give a shit about one of those commanders.
Yep.
So how this fell into competitive is really interesting to me.
It also
Absolutely.
seemed like it was the closest in terms of
It
the
is.
voting,
This
and
is
the least polarized, or the most polarized.
The only category that didn't
Least
get
polarized.
over 100 votes.
Right.
Yep.
To definitively state that it
Yeah.
was one or the other. So interesting thing to note.
And I think time will tell here. I think this is a new
Absolutely.
card, and I think time will tell that it will be in fewer and fewer cEDH decks as time goes by, and more casual decks.
I will say, if this was a card that was more like the original Black Lotus ability, then it would be
Yes, if it was Black
so
Lotus.
competitive and just like
So much more expensive.
yeah,
by
so
the way.
much, so insane.
Sell your house.
But, you know, it's not, and it's conditional, and because of that, I think it will fall more into casual over time.
And now it's time for the bonus round. When this card came out, 9 out of 10 players thought that last player was a chucklehead for not running it. It was then immediately inducted into the category of must-plays. Arcane Signet. For 2 generic artifact, tap, add 1 mana of any color in your commander's color identity. Now, I will state that this card not only came out or is coming out in a secret lair, but it was just reprinted in Commander Legends for a good while there. It was exclusive to select precons, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep.
So accessibility was an issue. These cards run about $3 now. Casual or competitive?
I'm going to go right off the bat and say casual, because this is a very accessible card. Even when it was more expensive, it didn't get. I think it spiked at like 15 at some point and then went down from there. This card is not a mana positive rock, but it does. It's a better Felwarstone. It's a really, really good card. It's great acceleration. It gives you any color in your commander's color identity. I think it's an outstanding card. I think it goes into a lot of decks. I think it's casual, though. I don't think it does enough on the competitive end of the spectrum, even though you will see it in most competitive lists, to be considered a competitive card. I think it's very much a casual card.
Unfortunately, I'm going to have to break the harmony here. But I will say, so I think this card is competitive. But I will say, I think this card is competitive for a very specific set of reasons. And like Sol Ring, I think the responses will say that this card is more casual than competitive. So I'm saying this knowing that I'm just presenting my own personal opinion here. And the reason why is Felwarstone is played in almost every competitive deck that's playing Mana Rocks. After the mana positive Mana Rocks, the next best cards you can be playing for mana acceleration are the 2 mana producing things that come in untapped. So not like the Fire Diamonds of the world or the Sky Diamonds, but more like Signets, Talismans, Felwarstone, and even some of the ones that tap for like 1, like I forget what the name of it is.
Mindstone?
Mindstone, a great example.
Thought Vessel?
Thought Vessel, that's right, exactly. And Thought Vessel, like nice little added bonus there, same with Mindstone. But this adds something, this is color fixing, and there is no condition upon which you get your colors. Signets, which also do color fixing, and Talismans, which do color fixing, either require life or for you to filter mana through them, and then you don't really get to pick the colors in the same sense. It's hard to like cast a Swords to Plowshares off of an untapped Signet, right? So, so from that perspective, this is the best, hands down, 2 mana, not positive, mana rock in the game in Commander. And that's why I think it's competitive, because every single competitive deck that is playing artifacts for ramp, which is like most of them, is going to be playing Arcane Signet to make sure that they get their color fixing. That said, it is a common, it is opened consistently, and it fits into every single deck in the format, right? Every deck can play it, and almost every deck will, is why I think the response is going to be a little bit more on the casual side, because it's accessible and it slots in. But I just want to underscore like how amazing this card is for competitive decks, and how if you're playing like Signets and you're not playing Arcane Signet, you're just playing like the Ravnica Signets, you're wrong. Like you should be playing an Arcane Signet for sure. So that's why I think it's competitive. But we are at an impasse, my friend.
So I don't disagree with your points. And I do think that it's incredibly powerful as a card. I think it's absolutely the best 2 CMC color fixing mana rock that is in the game. Absolutely. I think that if you're looking back at the way it impacted competitive lists when it came out, it did eliminate a lot of Signets. You know, you saw the prevalence of more talismans when that whole set was completed of talismans, which started to eliminate Signets a little bit more. And then when Arcane Signet came out, it was just like, well, why am I even running any Signets if I don't have to? It's an outstanding card. I think I'm falling maybe into the idea of the accessibility of it and how it can just slot into every deck. I do think you bring up a lot of fair points about its prevalence as the best 2 CMC rock, as the impact it had on competitive Commander, and just the best kind of color fixing, and the viability of that color fixing in terms of your level of interaction immediately after it.
Yeah.
You know, like the counter spells, the red elemental blasts, for example, the Swords to Plowshares, Vampire Tutors, all this stuff that you can do right afterward. So you know, I can come around on this one and agree with you that it can be competitive. Though I do think we're going to see a lot of people responding saying that it's casual.
I firmly believe
the
that
ubiquity of it.
You firmly believe that? Majority
the
of
community will think that it is more casual.
Okay.
I'm just trying to give my thought process on why it is such an impactful card for competitive, and why you won't really see competitive lists that don't run it.
Yeah.
I'll state that for monocolored list, arguably the best 2 CMC rock would be something like Mind Stone, because there's card advantage baked into the card and you can get away with a generic. And I will state that you don't often see Mind Stone in multicolored decks, which is a majority of competitive list, and there aren't that many monocolored lists that can cut it in competitive.
I actually cut Mind Stone for Arcane Signet and Godo, funnily enough.
The reason color was that necessary?
Well, Godo in particular, that deck runs a lot of colorless land, and it needs red mana, and having a little bit of extra red mana is very helpful for that deck in particular. So decks that are sort of along those lines, or other decks that are like blue, mono blue, might want to keep blue up for counter spells and things like this. So mana drains, counter spells, cryptic commands, things like that. So I see your point, but I do think that it, even in monocolor decks, it's very relevant. It's a very relevant card.
And I'll state that the most prevalent in any given color would be Urza for blue, Godo for red, Savala or Yisun for green, Heliod or Teshar for white, and then of course black, you have things like Crick, Yawgmoth, Tiny Bones, Sidisi.
Although less so these days.
It's a little bit of a rough patch, with mono black. But you're still sticking with competitive, and how do you feel?
I mean, I still feel that this could fall on either spectrum. I think that in general people respond to it like it's a more casual card, but for the sake of our harmonious ending, I'm gonna go with Phil's arguments and accept the competitive analysis of this, because also it did have a huge impact on competitive Commander when it came out. It made a big difference in people's lists. They dramatically changed how they're approaching their Monarch suite. So we'll go with competitive.
Gentlemen,
I'm going to wait until he's fully done speaking this time.
With 119 votes to a mere 22, and by no means is that the worst ratio we've seen today, but 119 individuals feel this card is in fact casual.
I do totally understand that.
Yep.
Hopefully by listening to this discussion, for those of you who think that, you sort of understand the perspective of why I feel that it's a competitive card.
Mm-hmm.
But keeping in mind the ubiquity, the price point, and the fact that it helps all decks, kind of like Sol Ring, makes it totally understandable why that's the outcome.
It feels like that's kind of what we're seeing in a lot of these polls, is if you have more access to it, like the cards that are on the cheaper end of the spectrum that kind of can be slapped into any deck, it seems like people are feeling that those are cards that could just be considered casual. And I think, what we find as people who play in competitive Commander metas a lot is that there's another lens that you can look through when analyzing some of these cards and seeing its impact on the format, seeing how it changes lists, seeing the potential for what that card can offer you after it comes down onto the board. There's more than just how much it costs and how the emotional response to a card is.
And that is part of the game with casual or competitive. It isn't always about the accessibility. In much the same way Anton stated, you can look at this game with a different lens, and competitive players oftentimes do. Because the Scepter isn't for every list, but I'll certainly play it in Teshar, and I don't know what category you'd throw that into. But that is it for Artifact Ramp Edition. I felt like this was a relatively soft round of questions for our players. However, the next few rounds are going to be that much more difficult. We'll cover things from removal to interaction on the stack to stacks itself. I am very curious to hear your thoughts and, of course, those of my guests. But that's the whole concept here. We're going to poke at the idea of what makes something casual or competitive. Again, if you want to take part in our future polls, the only way to do so is by joining the Discord. So feel free to click the link in the description down below. Any closing thoughts before we end this one?
I think this is really fun. I love this idea of analyzing cards and seeing what is competitive, what's casual. I think that it brings up a chance for people to really uncover what is fundamentally part of the analysis for deciding that. And there's a lot of discussion about, like, what should I put into my deck if I want to make it more competitive, and maybe some of these things that we're talking about can help people that are trying to bridge that gap, understand like the things that we're looking at, and maybe help them make some different decisions on how to upgrade their deck.
Yeah, and I think just to sort of add on a little bit, I think that it's great that we're having these discussions because, one, it's interesting, and two, at the end of the day, the competitive mindset is kind of just a mindset about how to play Commander one way, and I think anything that we do that furthers the discussion and anything that we do that creates debate is excellent, because that means that we're thinking about the game that we all love so much. And so thank you, Patrick, for putting this together. It was super fun to do.
Absolutely.
I cannot wait to see the comments on this video.
Oh man,
I can't wait for people to tell me how wrong I am, and that's totally fine. I hope to see you on the Discord, and maybe we can spin up a couple games.
Yeah, I know this was a fun one to brew up, and I'm very excited to be sharing this with you all. So if you enjoy this one, of course, I don't often say this, but share this one with your friends. Share this one if you enjoyed the content today, because this is a topic that's near and dear to me. I see so much feuding, moreover, any format with Commander over casual versus competitive. Everyone's going at each other's throats over certain cards or certain things being featured in a list, and to me, I think it's silly because we've come to agreements and disagreements on certain cards, and they're not only because of their accessibility, but their viability in the format. And there's certain cards that people felt were casual that are arguably more competitive in our mind, and it's funny to see that we can have an argument about the same game and come up with two different concepts on this very simple question. Yep. So thank you so much for tuning in to this one. Of course, you all know it, but at the end of this video, there is, of course, an end roll and a special shout out to one lucky Patreon member, and that Patreon member is Handsome. Thank you for being a Brew Crew member. You are among the best. And now for his thoughts on the monthly topic, I turn to Jeffrey Williamson.
Hey guys, Jeff here, also known as Lavdavka online. Thanks, Patrick, for letting me share my thoughts on this month's topic. Yes, we all know the answer is white, obviously. White has been the most disadvantaged color since Alpha. Healing salve, anyone? And the only thing that seems to have changed in all this time is that it continues to be easily the most disadvantaged color, despite lots of public discussion about how to help white out. Never mind the life gain nonsense, never mind the white needs ramp and draw issue. Being the weakest color is literally the fundamental aspect of white's color identity, as Wizards have developed it. Every other color has something significant that it does, better than other colors, while white makes everything fair and makes everyone play by the same rules, and thus white is specifically designed to not be capable of breaking parity the way the other colors do. White's problems cannot be fixed with mere creative mechanics. White needs for its identity to evolve past the limitation of being forced to play fair compared to every other color.
And that will do it for this episode. If you have ideas for the next casual or competitive topic, feel free to leave them in the comments section down below. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that as to what we can talk about next, what we can gamify next, and I'll certainly consider them when building that next episode. But guys, thank you for joining.
Thank you for having us.
Pleasure.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. Again, I'm Patrick Marlette, and happy brewing, babies. Because I do think it's silly that these Twitter, any forum you go to, people are like, I'm not gonna play with this guy if he plays Jewel Lotus again. And it's like,
Chill, homie.
yeah, or like, and half the shit, like, and arguably you can be like, well, I think the majority of people are gonna say this is a casual card, but it's not gonna be as impactful as it would be in competitive.
I was appreciative of the ability to sort of have a platform to have this discussion, and I think that's really important too. Like, knowing that I think that the community is going to push a card in a certain direction, like they're going to say Jewel Lotus is competitive, I think it's casual, or they're going to say Arcane Signet's casual and I think it's competitive. And to just give an additional perspective about how you make a decision on how you evaluate a card. And just more content like this is just great for the community. It's just so 100%. Good for the community.
That's what I was trying to allude to at the end there, because I absolutely think these conversations elevate people's understanding of the game that we love.
I do think that this is a conversation worth having, because I think that we shouldn't be so rude towards each other when it comes to this game. It is a casual format, and we're all trying to have a good time, and our concept of fun might be different, but I think poking at cards as being competitive or casual isn't healthy, because you're going to oust someone for a non-reason. Like, you could be playing Lotus Petal in a list that doesn't take advantage of it, but don't be mad at the person for slamming the Lotus Petal. Where people do have that reaction though, where someone they pulled that Forcible and they want to play it, and then you blow out someone's big 10 mana play, and they just hate you for the rest of the day.
Yeah, that's why people hate counter spells, right? It's for that reason.
Well, I mean, but you need it. And I don't play blue and I don't brew for blue, but I understand the necessity. I understand the need of it at a table, because when I sit down, I mentioned this in the video, the deficiency of white video I just put out, where I don't sit at the table and think to myself, man, we can really use more white list. That's never crossed my mind. But if I don't see a blue list, that's even earlier when we were playing, you're just like, no blue list. You automatically think that you need stack interaction.
Some pods I've seen on the EDH subreddit are like no counter spells.
But to me, like, what game are you playing? Like, if you just want to enable why don't you just play Solitaire? Like, if you didn't want any actual that's what's unique about MTG. The fact that we can impact the other person's board and interact on the stack, interact on a level that other games mechanically can't.
Yeah, interact in several different levels. Yes. Like not just the game is out there and we're playing the game. It's all the things that happen before things come into play, as things leave play. How many cards you get to draw, and all the things that affect the board.